Hello everybody, it's me V, and I'm here in a pre-recorded video today because we have just reached 100 subscribers as of the time I am doing this. I made a community post a little while ago when it seemed like we were getting pretty close, and the overwhelming majority seemed to want a tier list video, so that's what I'm gonna do today. Our overwhelming majority of like 5 people, because like 5 people voted in it, but you know what? I wanted to make a tier list anyways, so we're gonna go ahead. And so I had a couple of ideas for things that I could do for tier lists, and I kind of was just like, screw it. It's probably gonna take me like 20 minutes to record all of them. Why don't we just do them all? So that's what we're doing here today. So, what we're gonna do, summary, looking ahead, is I am planning on doing a favorite Fire Emblem games tier list, and I'm actually splitting that up into 2 tiers. So one is going to be like my favorite entries based on gameplay, and one is going to be my favorite entries based on story, and I'm going to kind of assess those independently, but also like you could probably figure out where I stand on the games just from that, just because I don't want any like, oh, well, you're prioritizing the gameplay over the story or whatever for my justifications. And then I'm also thinking maybe I could rank the games by how much I enjoy their shipping content. You know, like which games have like my favorite ships, like which ones have like the dynamics that I like the most, that kind of thing. And then I was thinking we could also do a tier list of the blonde boys of Fire Emblem for their submissiveness and breedability. And I'm not sure how I want to split this. If I want to like make this 2 videos, or if I just want to do it all in one, because I could definitely save like the ships and the submissive breedableness for a Pride Month video, but we'll figure that out later. In the meantime, here we are with our medley of Fire Emblem games up on the screen. And what I'm gonna do is I'm only gonna rank certain games once. So Echoes is a remake of Gaiden. I'm not gonna rank Gaiden, I'm just gonna rank Echoes. Same deal with Shadow Dragon and New Mystery. I'm gonna be candid about which ones I didn't play. There's a couple on here. I think actually at this point there's only one on here that I've started but haven't finished, and that is Genealogy, but I feel like I've played enough of Genealogy to kind of get an idea of where I'd put it, because I made it all the way to like the second to last chapter, so it's not like I played one chapter and then didn't play it anymore. So starting off with Shadow Dragon and New Mystery, I have not played these 2 yet, so they are going to go firmly in the never played category. We'll see how I enjoy them when I get there. Echoes, honestly, I hate to do it. Probably mostly negative. This is the gameplay, by the way. Probably should have started with that. I'm doing the gameplay first. Echoes, mostly negative on the gameplay aspects. It's just, there's not really a lot of class freedom from what I remember. The maps are kind of that generic, wide open, oftentimes low movement. The endlessly spawning enemies drive me crazy. The terrain avoid bonuses drive me crazy. Like the magic being like the only thing that can hit the broadside of a barn drives me crazy. I just didn't have very much fun playing this game, which sucks because there was a lot of like really neat things in it that I thought maybe if they had modernized the actual tactical gameplay would have been really cool. Like, I really thought the dungeons were a cool idea, and like the kind of like open dungeon exploration aspect was really neat. It's just like, that's so little of the game, and then by the time you get to the end, it's like, just get me out of here. Genealogy, for gameplay, I'm gonna say it has some good points. I don't love a lot of things about it. I don't love the pawn shop. I don't love the money management system. I don't love the way they structured the wide open maps, but I love the wide open maps. I think they're really cool. They give you a really neat sort of like sense of space in the world. I think if they had filled them out better, like they could have been like real bangers, but there's just a lot of like Kaga jank going on that kind of tips it into being not quite being like a higher tier, but it's not quite bad enough for me to bump it any lower, because it has a lot of really cool concepts that I think are integrated well. I just want to note that I tend to judge the older entries a little bit less harshly than I judge a lot of the modern entries when it comes to the gameplay. And that's just because, you know, modern entries have had a lot more tries at creating similar or the same systems, whereas older entries were still kind of experimenting. Another part of it is just the technology they had to work with. You know, an SNES game on an SNES cartridge is going to have a lot less wiggle room than, say, a 3DS game or a Switch game. Thracia I haven't played yet. I have a feeling this is going to be a nightmare for me on par of Shadows of Valentia, just from what I've heard. The Kaga jank, the pinnacle of Kaga jank. Binding Blade, from a gameplay standpoint, I would say I actually really liked it. You know, it had some quirks, admittedly. Like, the accuracy was not my favorite thing in the entire world. You know, I don't love that there's not really a lot of great places to grind. I don't love kind of like the RNG of it all, but like I also acknowledge that for its time, it's a fine game, you know, and it wasn't so off-putting. Like, as long as you were willing to kind of like take the time to do some arena grinding and that kind of thing, you could definitely make your life a lot easier, even though this is one of like the hard Fire Emblems. But it also does help that I played it on an emulator. So I had access to save states and, sorry, a very real Game Boy Advance. So I had access to save states and everything, which I have a feeling if I didn't, my opinion might have been a bit lower, but for what it is, you know, I like the map design. I like the kind of like the characters you get. It was just a fun game. Blazing Blade I haven't played yet, though I have a feeling, since I'm going to guess that it has a lot of the same design philosophies as Binding Blade, people have told me it's basically the same kind of thing, except it's easier and like a bit more like quote-unquote fair. So I have a feeling I'll probably put it above Binding Blade when I play it, but I can't really make a determination right now. Sacred Stones, I like it, but I like it a bit less than Binding Blade in the gameplay department. And it's still, you know, I finished Binding Blade a couple of days ago as of recording this, and it's still kind of hard for me to pin down exactly why I like Binding Blade more. I think part of it is just, like, the map design feels cleaner in Binding Blade to me for some reason. I think having every single objective being sort of like a capture the throne thing instead of a bunch of like route maps also kind of creates a bit more interesting strategy with how you approach the maps depending on like what map you get. And I think Tower of Volney grinding just has me a little bit sour. Okay, so Radiant Dawn and Path of Radiance. I have to admit that I have experienced these games, but I haven't actually played them, like physically played them myself. So there's a lot I can't say. Like, I have an idea of how it plays because I played through it with a mutual of mine. She really wanted to show me the game. This was before I had kind of committed to playing all of the Fire Emblem games on stream, so I was like, sure, let's do it. You know, if I had known I was gonna go through this whole extravaganza of playing all these games on stream, I probably would have held off and just experienced it for myself the first time like that, but I didn't. So it's hard for me to really have like a feel for them. But based on what I know, I think they're both pretty solid likes. I would actually maybe put... I think in terms of like raw gameplay, I would have Path of Radiance over Radiant Dawn. But with the caveat that I think Radiant Dawn could be like a lot cool, like better, more solid in the gameplay department. Because it has like a really cool kind of idea with like the shifting perspectives and you playing different groups of characters at different points in the story to get different perspectives. I think that's all really, really neat. And I think if they had kind of integrated it more fully, I think Radiant Dawn could have been like a superior game to Path of Radiance in like the gameplay department with just like, you know, like kind of making different builds and experimenting with different things. But in terms of like what we actually got, I would put it a little bit below because I just don't think it reached its full potential. Awakening, it's been a while since I've replayed Awakening. It's honestly kind of hard for me to rank. I have played parts of it since. I think I would actually probably put it... I like it, but how much do I like it, you know? Might even be like, has some good points. Well, oh, okay. I'm putting it into like, because I think the build diversity you can get up to, and especially if you like really invest into the child characters, I think is a lot of fun. And that's something that puts it above the like has some good points category for me, even despite the fact that Awakening has kind of less than impressive maps to go along with it. You know, I'm actually gonna put it above Sacred Stones. I'm gonna reorder these a little bit. I think Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn are better. I put Awakening up a bit higher just because the quality of life features it brings, like with casual mode and everything, just make it a lot more fun to play for me. I've never really been like a huge permadeath person, so like a game that lets me take away the permadeath and just kind of enjoy it without having to worry about like constantly save stating or dying to that, you know, really unlucky crit or that really unlucky bolting tome, Astolfo. That definitely puts it a lot higher for me, even if the map design is lesser than the games, some of the other games on this list. But I'm not putting it above Binding Blade though, just because I feel like Binding Blade has a bit more solid like map design. Okay, Birthright, Conquest, and Revelation, these are all on here separately, and you know, I think that's fair in terms of gameplay at least. I would put Birthright above Awakening for sure. I don't know if it's better than Binding for me. Just because, you know, everything that was really fun about Awakening is also in Fates. But, you know, some of the mechanics are a lot cleaner, like the pair-up is a lot cleaner. You actually have even more options for build variety with, like, second seals. They're not second seals, like friendship seals and heart seals and marriage seals and everything, which means that you can also get into a lot more shenanigans with the kids. But Birthright is still pretty held back by having a very like Awakening sort of map design philosophy, like a lot of routes, a lot of open maps. So it's not quite elevated to the level of something with a better map design. But it's good. You know, I like it a lot. Conquest, I think will surprise nobody, is going into S tier. Just like the sheer variety of like challenge it brings. Like the map design is excellent, the challenge is excellent, And you can still have fun with it because it has those quality of life features that were introduced with New Mystery / Awakening in the West, since we didn't get New Mystery. Of, you know, being able to turn off permadeath, Phoenix mode if you're really struggling, like I was my first playthrough. I've played through Conquest on Phoenix and casual mode. And it's definitely doable in casual. I don't know why I was so afraid of it when I was much younger and I played it for the first time. But, you know, it has a lot of really good accessibility. And then if you have the DLC, like, and you really are really struggling, like, you have access to grinding maps and things like that. Revelation, I'm actually going to be a little bit controversial here. I know people constantly complain about Revelation, and it's, like, gimmicky, sort of, like, maps. I feel like people have a very short memory when it comes to comparing Revelation to other Fire Emblem games, because most of them have at least one map that's like really like gimmicky and kind of awkward. I can think of like 3 in like Path of Radiance or Radiant Dawn alone, where if that was in Revelation, people would be absolutely dragging it through the mud, but because it's in Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn, it's like the greatest thing ever. So for that reason, I can't justifiably put it any lower than like tier. And I think it actually might go above Awakening for me. Just one other postscript note on Revelation. I know the argument is going to be, well, yeah, a lot of other Fire Emblem games have some gimmicky maps, but Revelation is all gimmicky maps. I don't really agree with that evaluation for the most part. The Revelation maps did not bother me at all. I just kind of thought they were sort of a unique variety and they added flavor and challenge, but I know some people get really annoyed with them. It just wasn't the case for me. Because again, like, you just have so much variety, especially since this is the game where you kind of, like, cross over between Nora and Hoshido, which means you have even more options, which is absolutely crazy. So yeah. My controversial opinion for the video, until we hit this next game, which is Fire Emblem Three Houses, which I'm gonna be even more controversial about. Three Houses gameplay, in my opinion, is dog shit. And I don't want to be, like, mean. It's not like Echo's dog shit, but, like, it's bad, you know? And I could cite a lot of things when I talk about that. And I'm going to, because otherwise people are gonna get mad at me. Map design, awful. Every map has like the Awakening problems. I don't think the build diversity that you can get in Awakening and Fates is really like there, because every sort of character has, well, like there's a clear best class, and there was like better classes in Awakening and Fates, but like I don't think I saw anything that was so eclipsed in Awakening and Fates as like Wyvern eclipsed everything in Three Houses, and that's, you know, because they got Kanto, they got access to whatever skills, you know, the good growths, they had like way better growths, I think, than everything else. I'm not like super like deep into the gameplay scene, but yeah, the spell lists, I think, were a real miss to bring those back, because then you just have characters who just don't work in certain classes. Like, you know, like, you're not gonna have a very good time if you try and make Dedue a mage or something like that. You could make it work in, like, Awakening and Fates and all that. A character who had a bad magic stat could still work in a magic class, because they had, like, access to all of the tomes and things that magic users could use. Three Houses, you don't get that. And then real miss, that was something else I didn't mention about Awakening, or not Awakening, definitely not Awakening, but that's something else I didn't mention about Fates, is like the lack of class gender restrictions for all of the base game classes, some of the DLC classes. I'll still die mad that they made Grandmaster male only for some reason. But yeah, the lack of gender restrictions in Fates was a blessing, because you could do so much more You know, before you couldn't have like male troubadours and male Pegasus Knights, and now you could, and that was really fun. And then Three Houses reintroduces that, and it also kind of like kneecaps some of the characters, because, you know, you want Linhard, but he can't go to Gremory, because Gremory's for women only for some reason. Or you can only give Dark Flyers to women, so characters who might be good Dark Flyers but are men are just screwed. That kind of thing. And then also kind of like the monastery is a drag. I hate it. But it's also kind of necessary if you want to really like optimize your play for Three Houses. The calendar system breaks the pacing of the game once you get to the later part. I know that's more story, but like it's a gameplay mechanic that interferes with the story, but also the gameplay. Because you can't just go on to the next thing, on to the next thing, on to the next thing. If you really want to optimize your gameplay, you have to do the monastery, which is like a minimum of 1 week. It takes like 40 minutes to get through the entire thing. Just, anyways. So yeah, Three Houses is not my favorite. I also don't love the way they did the recruitment mechanic in Three Houses. It kind of causes some issues with, you know, certain characters needing to be recruited, and then if you get them late, you get screwed out of some, like, getting some, like, necessary training for them. If you get them early, you can drop your characters from before, but then you get screwed after the time skip if you're playing anything other than Crimson Flower, because, whatever the bandit fighting chapter 13, you have to use your original class, so if you dropped them, you're gonna have, like, you can soft lock yourself on chapter 13 if you just, like, weren't using your, like, in-house characters. Like, there's just a lot of things that I think were not implemented particularly well. And then we come to Engage, which I think is just, like, the complete opposite end of the spectrum on gameplay. Like, I would say it's probably... Like, I don't know if I would say it's better than Conquest, but they are at the very least equals. And I think that's partially because, first of all, got rid of the gender class restrictions again, thank God. But also because I think Engage is arguably the game that gives you, like, the most kind of, like, diversity with, like, how you take your characters. And that's partially because of the way the emblems work, and if you pair emblems with characters, like, you can really patch up a character who is, like, not succeeding as well. For example, if you really want to use Alfred, like I did, it's not a death sentence if he, you know, doesn't get good speed growth, because you can just stick Lynn on him for a couple of chapters, inherit, like, Speed Taker, or, like, whatever flat speed growth skill she gives, and then he's fine, and he's functioning just like any of the other characters. You know, like, you can push characters to greater heights, and basically anybody is viable. Some characters are better than others, but, like, there's no unviable character in Engage if you're willing to put the work in. And then I actually really like how they kind of took a page from, well, I don't know if they, like, got the idea from Triangle Strategy, but they took a page from Triangle Strategy where if you lose a battle, you can just restart the whole thing and keep the experience, which is a godsend for when you have a lower level character and you want to grind them up, because you can just keep repeating the map until they get a couple of levels if that's what you want to do. You know, and that helps for, like, me playing on, like, a casual mode. I know classic players don't really do that, but I'm not a classic player, so. The only thing I would say that Engage really does not have over Conquest is Engage's level scaling is pretty wonky. And, like, you don't necessarily, like, it's not easy to grind up a character who gets really left behind late game. Like, trust me, I've been doing, like, the support grinding for Engage, and that necessitates me level grinding a bunch of characters that I didn't use, and it's honestly pretty painful. Actually, you know, for that reason I'm putting it below Conquest. Conquest had that, you know, down. But, like, those are some pretty, like, minor kinks, I think. Those are pretty easy to work out in the next entry. And it doesn't make the game, like, super unenjoyable. just like a little bit annoying with like the support grinding being the way it is and everything, but you know, I can move past that, especially after they added some quality of life things to make that a little bit easier. And then we have kind of the spin-off games. I don't know if I should really rank these for the gameplay, because we're not really talking about Fire Emblem gameplay when we're talking about like warriors and stuff. I would say the original Warriors, I like it. I'm putting these at the end of every tier. I'm not going to put them above these guys. I'm just going to put them within the tiers I think they deserve to be in. Warriors, I think, is like, I enjoy Warriors games, so that's going to color my impression of these a little bit. I honestly think, like, gameplay-wise, the original Warriors was, like, as near perfect to a Warriors experience as I can get. There's a couple of weird things about it that I wish were a little bit different. I think the resource grinding is really excessive. Like, you need way too many, like, resources to, like, get character badges and all of that stuff. I also think, you know, there's a couple of, like, oddities where, like, you can't direct characters to go take outposts. That's a little bit weird. One thing that really bothered me, which you probably wouldn't notice if you're lonely and you don't play this game with anybody else, but I did play parts of it with another person. And when you play in 2-player mode, it actually, like, massively despawned enemies, or at least it did when I played it back around launch with that person. It would like despawn enemies off of the map, which actually made it like almost impossible to S-rank maps if you were playing with another person, because there just like weren't enough enemies to take out to get like the 2000 KO requirement to get the S rank. So like weird things like that, but like other than that, like near perfect of a Warriors experience for me personally. Fire Emblem Heroes, I'm just gonna stick it firmly in meh. Like, it's fine as a game. I do recommend it to friends who are looking at Fire Emblem as a series they maybe want to get into, but they're not very tech savvy or they don't have the equipment to kind of get a very real DS or 3DS or anything going. But they want to see if they kind of like the gameplay, to see if they might want to be going into a new mainline entry, so I will use it as kind of an introductory game of like, hey, here, play this, it's free, you can get an idea of what Fire Emblem games play like a little bit, on a much smaller scale, obviously. And you know, maybe you can like look at a couple characters, you'll get a couple characters as you play for free, and if any of them pique your interest, then like, I'll help you get set up with the game they're from, for example. So like, you know, if one of my friends really likes, you know, Lucius or something, I'll be like, okay, like, I'll get you set up with Fire Emblem 7. That's the game he's from. And then you can play it and see what you think. But other than that, like, it's not really exceptional. TMS I actually haven't played. I've heard good things, but, I just don't really care. I mean, it's not that I don't care, it's just not a game that I'm really, like, super interested in pursuing. Because I'm not really a big, like, Persona or Shin Megami Tensei, I guess, fan. So I don't really have a ton of interest in, like, a crossover of the two. Warriors 3 hopes in the gameplay department? Honestly, like, it's really, really hard for me to say. I know a lot of people really like 3 hopes as, like, a Warriors game. I was sort of weaned on the Warrior genre with Dynasty Warriors 3, and Dynasty Warriors, like, 6 was another one that was big for me. And I feel like future Warriors games have sort of tried to get too tricky with their gameplay. If you've played them, you know what I mean, but like, if you've played Zelda, the Zelda Warriors games, Hyrule Warriors versus what's it called? Age of Calamity. You kind of might have an idea of what I'm talking about. Like, the original Warriors, Hyrule Warriors was more like the original Fire Emblem Warriors in that it was very simple. You had certain characters, certain weapons. They kind of all had sort of unique playstyles. That's another thing I hated about the original Warriors. There were so many clones, it was ridiculous. And then Age of Calamity came along, and they were like, well, every character needs to have their moveset, but they also need to have, you know, this additional item and special trigger, and then there's this, like, boss rush kind of thing, and, you know, like, oh, you have to control the divine beasts, and it just kind of, like, goes off the rails. And I feel like Three Hopes did something similar with its gameplay, where you already had, like, a really good template with the Fire Emblem Warriors game, and then they were like, no, we need to add all of these features, so you need to have, you know, like, weapon arts, and you need to have battalions, and you need to have this, and this, and this, and this, and I remember playing it for the first time. I live streamed it. You can literally see this happening, but, like, I was counting the tutorials I was getting, and I had, like, 15 or 16 tutorials in the first, like, 30 minutes of playing, and then as you're going through the game, you're in, like, the second to last chapter, and you're still getting gameplay tutorials. And, like, that, in my opinion, is, like, the mark of a bad game, where you have so many mechanics, you know, because, like, players are gonna hit a point with a game where there's gonna be, like, a complexity overload, and if you don't utilize that complexity in an interesting manner, or like a, you know, like a useful manner, people are just gonna start defaulting to whatever works. And the problem is, Three Hopes, in my opinion, has a lot of complexity, but there's nothing you can't beat by just mashing the Y button. So, like, why am I gonna bother learning all of these mechanics that make my life maybe 2% easier when I can just mash a button and get through the entire thing just fine? And that's the problem with, like, Warriors games specifically having a lot of complexity creep for me, is that at a certain point it's like, but if I can just kill everything by mashing the Y button, why do I need all of these extra features? It just bogs the game down after a certain point. I wish they would have put more time into, like, making more diverse movesets, because the movesets are really samey. Or, you know, having a better story, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So, it's meh, I would say. Like, it's still a Warriors game, it's still fun. There's a lot of problems with it, though, in the gameplay department. The lack of side modes is also, like, a huge issue for me. Hyrule Warriors and the original Fire Emblem Warriors had these, like, very rich side modes with a lot of different, like, challenges and things. Hyrule Warriors more so than Fire Emblem Warriors, don't get me wrong. And there's just none of that in Three Hopes, so if you're not enjoying going through the story, like, there's nothing to play. But anyways, I think that will conclude the gameplay tier list. I will be going ahead and doing the story tier list in a moment after I reset. Okay, and we are back with the story portion of our Fire Emblem games tier list. I'm talking a lot more than I actually thought I would, but that's just more material to work with in the editing bay, baby. So I went ahead and I just kept the games that I haven't played in the never played category. I'm not gonna go back and say the same thing again about them. So just as a reminder, that is Shadow Dragon, that is New Mystery of the Emblem, that is Thracia, that is Blazing Blade, and that is TMS for the games I haven't played. Now onto the story. So I will say, personally for me, if I were to weight the games on, like, an overall sort of scale, I definitely weight the gameplay a lot higher than I weight the story, because in my opinion, if a game's not fun to play, I'm not gonna play it, you know? It could have the greatest story ever, but if it's dog shit to play, who cares, right? Like, I'm doing this to have fun. If I wanted to go read a story, I would read a book, or I'd watch a movie, or I'd watch a TV show, or something like that. That's just story. There needs to be a strong gameplay element in a game for me to rate it highly. But undeniably, an enjoyable story can make a good game much better, can make a bad game slightly better. I mean, if it's a really, really unfun game to play, like I said, the best story in the universe could not save it for me. But you know, like, it can have its merits. I can enjoy it on those merits. So, starting again, we're gonna go in numerical order, roughly. Echoes is, honestly, this might be a bit controversial. In my opinion, Echoes is, like, kinda... I'll put it in has some good points. I think that does some things well enough, like, interestingly enough, that I can't necessarily justify putting it in meh, but I don't know if I can necessarily put it any higher. I really love the way that it structures the story. I love that you have these, like, two divergent parallel stories where you have one half of the game you're playing Alm, the other half you're playing Celica, and you can kind of swap between the two whenever you want up until, you know, you hit their end point for the act. So you can do all of Alm and then all of Celica, or you can do one Alm, one Celica, one Alm, one Celica, or you can do half of Alm, half of Celica. Like, I love that kind of, like, freeform structure of, like, going through the story. The story itself is fine. You know, I wouldn't say it's, like, anything extremely, like, groundbreaking or unique, but it's serviceable. I will say it does get bumped down a little bit for me just because of the, like, weird misogyny that underlies a lot of it. Like, every single female character is somebody you have to rescue or is captured or is a damsel. Like, there's a lot of just, like, weird that I think they could have probably taken this opportunity when they were sort of reworking it to remove, and they didn't for whatever reason. In fact, they even added some, which was just uncomfortable to experience. But yeah. Genealogy, honestly, I'm gonna have to put in never played. I know I said I've gotten through, like, 80% of it, but the way I played Genealogy was very scattered. Like, I would play, like, a chapter, and then I wouldn't play it for 6 months, and then I would play another chapter, and then I wouldn't play it for, like, a year, and then I would play another chapter. So I know what the story is. I love multi-generational stories in games. I think the, like, way they structured it is really cool, where you have the first gen, and then you go on to the second gen. I love the kind of, like, the way, you know, characters sort of inherit from their parents and they have stories based on what happened to their parents. I think the storytelling is really solid. I can't really give you a good solid summary of what happened, though, because I just played it in such a scattered way that I don't remember. But I will be playing Genealogy on stream eventually. So I will revisit it then. Let's see here. Binding Blade. We just finished this one, so it is fresh on the brain. And I'm not entirely sure where I want to put it in terms of story. The thing with a lot of Fire Emblem games is a lot of Fire Emblem games tell, like, kind of the same story, just in, like, slightly different ways. And Binding Blade does not escape from that. You know, you have your lord whose home gets invaded by the evil empire, and then the lord fights back against the evil empire. And then they win, obviously, and then maybe there's something going on in the background that's sort of influencing it, maybe there isn't. I think the story of, like, the scouring and everything is, like, really interesting lore. From my understanding, that is going to get touched on a bit more in Blazing Blade, which I haven't played yet. But it should be able to stand on its own, especially since it came first. Blazing Blade was a prequel. This wasn't a sequel. So, you know, it has to stand on its own. I think I'll put it in like. It's very serviceable, the characters are very likable, the way the story is told is a little bit basic, the story is a little bit basic, but it's like a fun plot to play through. I think Roy being kind of this like young, sort of like upstart, kind of just like doing whatever he can, being put in this really hard position because of what's going on with Eliwood and what's going on with the world, is interesting. I would like to see it explored in more depth in a potential remake, if they ever remake it. But yeah. I'm also keeping in mind that some of these games are kind of like gonna be weighed down by like whatever happened, like whatever the technology was in the time that they were made. So like a genealogy is gonna be able to fit less text than a Fates, for example. So I'm focusing a bit on like the ideas and the structure, and less so necessarily on like the precise amount of content. And I really hope we get remakes of some of these so we can kind of see them come alive with like more modern amenities. Like for example, Binding Blade didn't have the benefit of like cutscenes, for example, where, you know, Echoes did. That's another thing that puts Echoes and has some good points for me though. The animation on the cutscenes was just like not that good. It was very clearly like 15 frames per second at all times, which kind of took me out of it, especially after Fates had like gorgeous cutscenes. So I'm expecting more of that, and then I get Alm raising his arm in like 5 frames per second. I'm like, oh god. Sorry. Okay, anyways, tangent. Sacred Stones. I think actually I enjoy about on the same level as Binding Blade for the story aspect. I do like that they have Erica and Ephraim as sort of like parallel protagonists. I think they could do a lot more with it if they ever were to remake this game. I would love to see them structure Erica and Ephraim's story more like Alm and Celica's, where you have both of them and you can kind of independently go through each side of their story, and then they would have more opportunities to be like unique from each other instead of kind of recycling the same plot points just with a different person as the mouthpiece. And, you know, maybe have like a little bit more ability to flesh out some of the later scenes where the twins are back together after you have the branching arc. And can we please rewrite the Erica scene? I'm just gonna go off on a little tangent here. I don't think Erica's stupid as a protagonist. I don't like the, like, kind of assessment that Erica is a dumb person because of her giving the stone over to Leon or whatever his name is. But I think the game really fucked her on that one. Just like the way that it treated the lead up to that was basically all of the characters being like, Erica, don't give it to him, it's not gonna work. And yeah, we know for sure it's not gonna work. And then she gives it to him anyways, and then the game treats it like she's, you know, like it doesn't, the problem is I don't think it says what the writers wanted it to say in that moment. Like, they wanted it to be sort of like a representation of how Erica's faith is so strong she believes that giving the stone over will save Leon, even if it doesn't. But I think the problem is that leading up is like, it's not a question of faith. Everybody's telling her, no, we just know it won't work. So it does kind of make her look a little bit dumb. I think there's so many ways you could rewrite that scene to support what you wanted to portray for Erica without making her look like an idiot. Like, why don't you have La Rochelle saying, like, I actually don't know if it'll work, but, like, I'm gonna do more research. I'll write a letter home to my uncle or whatever. And then after Erica gives him the stone, La Rochelle comes in and she's like, oh dear, like, yeah, I was trying to find you so I could tell you I got the letter back and it's definitely not gonna work. You know? I think that would be a little bit more supportive of the arc they wanted Erica to have. But anyways, I'm sorry, I went on a tangent there. I've been thinking about that a lot over the last few days, weirdly enough. Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn, I'm gonna have to kind of rank them together because they are so obviously, like, one story. Just not, like, they're one story separated into 2 games, so I don't think I can independently rank them because Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn are incomplete without each other. And I don't think it would be fair for me to, like, rate half of a story. I actually like them a lot. I think they're really interesting. They do follow some of the same kind of, like, Fire Emblem-y tropes, but Ike as a protagonist is really likable. Even if they didn't necessarily, like, stick the landing on some of their themes, I thought they were a bit more adventurous in what themes they were kind of willing to explore and how they were willing to do it. You know, because Binding Blade definitely has sort of, like, an underlying theme of, like, dragon racism, but it's not really super touched on. Like, it's not like a focal point. It's just kind of like a thing that happened in the lore of the world. Whereas Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn kind of make it more of like a central theme. So even if they didn't necessarily stick the landing, they tried, you know? And I think the characters are really enjoyable. The cutscenes are a little bit subpar, but I'm going with them working with like mid-2000s, like Funimation level voice acting for the English tub. The cutscenes look really smooth though. Like, they're very good looking cutscenes. The voice acting just drags them down, but like, that's something that could be worked out in a remake, or, you know, whatever they do in the future. Again, like, I love the way, I really like, you know, like, sort of like less traditional sort of storytelling elements. Not necessarily like different routes, but like different ways of approaching the story. I think Radiant Dawn does that in a really interesting way, again, with like sort of like the rotating perspective of different armies, so you get different perspectives during different points. I think if they flesh that out more, it could be really good. It's a little bit underutilized as it stands, but again, that's something they could work out in like a remake or a remaster if they ever wanted to do that in 25 years, when I'm far too old to be complaining about Fire Emblem on the internet. Awakening, story-wise, I think... Okay, I said it when I was talking about genealogy. I am a sucker for, like, multi-generational storylines, and Awakening does it well, in my opinion. It's a bit, like, generic, friendship-y, you know, whatever. It's very referential. That's, like, the main thing with Awakening that kind of holds me back from putting it higher, is that, like, it tries to reference everything in Fire Emblem, intentionally so. Like, I'll give them that. Like, they did it on purpose. But it does kind of lead to the structure of the plot being a little bit messier than maybe I would prefer. I don't know if I would say I like it less than Sacred Stones, though. I might like it less than Binding Blade. Binding Blade's just a little bit more coherent. Awakening does have good cutscenes, too. It's another thing. I'd say I probably like it. Just, like, generally speaking. Okay. Fates. Like Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn, I have to say, I think I have to rate all three of these as 1. I know a lot of people will kind of, like, pick apart Birthright, Conquest, and Revelation, and say, you know, like, oh, Conquest story bad, Birthright story good, and, like, they're, you know, I wouldn't say anybody says Birthright story's good, but, you know, whenever people pick them apart, they usually like to pick on Conquest as having, like, the worst Fire Emblem story ever. I find it really hard to rank these three separately because, like Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn, these were never really intended to be separate stories. These were intended to be 3 parts of one story. And so, like, I don't think I can accurately rate them as wholly separate beings. Unlike Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn, though, I do think there's a little bit more division, because you can definitely criticize sort of the way they went about telling the story, or like the specific plot beats in them, in a way that I don't think Radiant Dawn and Path of Radiance are really comparable, because, you know, Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn is like, you know, Radiant Dawn is a sequel to Path of Radiance. Whereas these three are kind of like parallel, concurrent things. And Birthright and Conquest are following roughly the same beats, they're just taking a different approach to getting to the end point. So you can definitely compare them in that sense. Now, here's the part where I get a little bit controversial, probably. I don't think Fates' story is that bad. And I literally, part of the reason why I wanted to replay Fire Emblem Fates on stream, which is what kickstarted this whole, like, I'm gonna play every Fire Emblem game thing, is because I was finding that I was having a lot of conversations about the plot, but I hadn't actually played through the games in their entirety since they came out basically in like 2016. And it was like 2022 or something at this point. So I hadn't played through them in a while, and I was like, maybe it is like just like worse than I remember. You know, I've been known to give a lot of leeway to games. I'm a bit of a black sheep enjoyer. So I was like, maybe I'm just like not remembering it accurately. Maybe it like was worse than I remember. So I was like, okay, I'll go play them again. You know, I played with the gay hack, of course, too, because we were now at the point where my very real 3DS could actually like easily mod that in, as opposed to whatever was going on back when the game first came out, where you had to like jailbreak your actual physical 3DS and like dump ROMs and I wasn't gonna do all that. I know it's technically not as difficult as it sounds, but I'm lazy. So yeah, so I replayed them and I was like, I don't really get it. Like, I don't get why these games get that much hate for their stories. Like, I don't think they're any worse than any of the other extremely generic Fire Emblem stories that are out there. And, you know, like, I can appreciate what they were trying to do with having the 3 separate games, even if it didn't necessarily succeed. I can appreciate a lot of, like, the themes in the story, and I will add the caveat that Fates really did get kind of screwed in the West by the localization problems, and if you are aware of a lot of the stuff that was going on in the Japanese version, it does retroactively make it make a lot more sense. Like, for example, a lot of people say, you know, Conquest is really stupid. Why didn't Corrin just stand up to Garen? Why did Corrin, like, obviously side with the obviously evil people? Why did Xander just follow all of Garen's orders? And I can understand where that criticism comes from if you just played the localization and you don't know anything about the Japanese version, which many players don't. And I'm not gonna fault them for that, because most people in the West don't speak Japanese, and if you don't know somebody who speaks Japanese, like, I was very fortunate, I've got a couple of mutuals, they are very good Japanese speakers, you know, they're on a level where they can kind of suss this stuff out and explain it to me. But if you don't have that, you know, you're probably not gonna know about it. And, you know, Conquest's story, in retrospect, makes a lot more sense when you realize that the Japanese had very, very, like, overt themes of, like, abuse and, like, parental, you know, abandonment and parental neglect and parental infighting and all of that, you know, really traumatizing, triggering stuff, and all of the Norian siblings have been experiencing that since they were very, very young. And if you know anything about psychology, you know that experiencing a lot of trauma really, really young can actually, like, it doesn't just, like, mess you up, it can, like, rewire your brain in very significant ways that make it really, really difficult to kind of function as, like, a non-traumatized person would expect you to. Like, for example, like, you can wind up with just living your life with very, like, kind of like PTSD-esque, it's not even PTSD-esque, like, you're basically living with PTSD symptoms, like hypervigilance. And so it makes sense, to me at least, as somebody who has a background where I know about this stuff and who knows what's in the original Japanese, it actually makes a lot of sense to me that the Norian siblings would be so terrified of Garen that they just could not, you know, go against him, because they're all kind of in like this survival mode constantly. Like, they are living, their father is cruel and he is murderous and he will kill them without a second thought, and they all know that. And it's been like that for them practically since they can remember. Leo barely has memories of like unabusive Garen. Like, they're very vague. Elise doesn't have any. So, like, they've all lived this way their entire lives. It makes sense to me that they would be in a position where they are looking out for their survival, and if they survive, they'll deal with whatever comes next. It's just a very, like, present-focused kind of, like, can't do any forward thinking, because if you do any forward thinking, you might miss what's happening now and you might die. So I don't think Conquest's story is that bad. I think there are a couple things that I definitely would have changed. The weird crystal ball thing where Azura shows it to Corrin and reveals that Garen's a slime monster, just get rid of that. Like, there's absolutely no reason to have that and then just not use it. You know, there's a couple of points where I think Corrin gets kind of undermined. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but in general, I think it's fine, you know. Birthright, I think, is similar. Like, I think Birthright's just generic in, like, the typical Fire Emblem sense of generic. And Revelation is a little bit Fire Emblem generic. They're all a little bit Fire Emblem generic, but you know what isn't. So the real question is, now that I've ranted about that for a solid God only knows how long, I'll find out in editing, where would I put these three? I think, honestly, I don't know if I like them better than Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn, but I don't know if I dislike them enough to go into like tier. I think I'm gonna put them up in love, but like under Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn. And again, a lot of this is just supported by, like, I think the themes are really interesting. I think the way they explore the themes are really interesting. I think they do a lot of really interesting things with the cast. The cutscenes are gorgeous. The voice acting's pretty good. I can't really remember any, like, significantly long stretches of voice acting. That's another thing SOV has, though. SOV has good voice acting. Unfortunately, it just doesn't save it for me. You know, like, the way the story is told is, you know, decent enough. It's serviceable. It gets you through it, you know? Okay, now for my... I'm just gonna... This entire last section of the tier list is just gonna be one controversial opinion after another. Because I know a lot of people say, like, Three Houses is, you know, the gameplay's not that good, but it's got the best writing in the series. It's the best written game in the series. I disagree with that in the strongest possible terms. And it's just partially because Three Houses just feels so unfinished. And I don't really know how to, like, convey that. Like, if you know, you know. If you've played it, you probably know what I'm talking about. But, like, they have an entire route that doesn't even have cutscenes because they couldn't finish it in time. You know, Silver Snow is just a copy-paste of Verdant Wind, or Verdant Wind's a copy-paste of Silver Snow with a different lord. Like, they reuse the same cutscenes, they reuse the same maps, they reuse the same, you know, unit placements, they reuse the same, like, everything, plot beats, you know, and it's, like, it's really disappointing because there's a lot of really interesting stuff contained within the concepts. I just don't think the story really had a really solid vision. I don't think they knew necessarily what themes they wanted to hit to make it like a cohesive work. It's gonna take a little bit of explaining. I think that within the stories, you can have very cohesive themes. I think the Blue Lions are the best example of this. Like, a cohesive theme in the Blue Lions story is trauma, but that's not quite extended out to the rest of the game. Silver Snow also has a theme of trauma with, like, what happens to the Nabateans, but then Rhea doesn't get any screen time to really go into that, and it just kind of gets shunted off. And then you could argue that Verdant Wind kind of tries to hit like a trauma theme, but with Claude and how he's been treated based on, you know, his like national origin. You know, he was kind of not really accepted in Elmira because he was half from Fodlan. He knew he wasn't really going to be accepted in Fodlan because he was half from Elmira, like that kind of thing. His parenting is a little bit questionable if you delve into some of his supports. Again, you have the Nabatean trauma underlying parts of Verdant Wind, but I don't think it really can kind of hit that theme with like the weight that it needs to. And then you could argue that Crimson Flower also has a trauma theme with what happened with Edelgard and the Agarthans and all of that. But then it just constantly undermines the theme because you'll have Edelgard reacting to something in like a traumatized manner, and then 5 seconds later she's shrieking over rats and you're like, and drawing pictures of Byleth in her room and hiding away because she's so embarrassed, and it's just like a very awkward handling. And I feel like that's just like the every single theme in Three Houses is like, if they have a theme, maybe it's solid in one route, it's kind of underdeveloped in another, it's undermined in another. It just feels like a mess. It feels like they didn't really know what they wanted to do with the Agarthans because they have this huge presence in part 1, right? Like they are the focal point of part 1 along with the Flame Emperor thing. And then they are just like almost completely discarded in part 2 in every route. You know, they're just kind of like background evil in Crimson Flower, and then ooh, they get defeated off screen. Dimitri takes them out by accident. Verdant Wind and Silver Snow, you actually go and get them, but it's like one chapter. And they're not really like a huge focal point of the second half of the game, which is weird because of the like narrative weight they were given in the first half. And speaking of things given narrative weight in the first half and not in the second half, you have like the Flame Emperor stuff, which is a huge part of part 1, and then nobody brings it up in part 2, not even on the route where you side with the Flame Emperor. So it's just a very weird, uncanny combo of like mishmashed elements. The first half and the second half, to me, honestly, almost feel like they were written by two completely different people. You know, or like they were headed by two different creative leads who weren't quite talking to each other on where they wanted it to go. And then how do I even put this? And then you have a bunch of background elements that kind of exist but don't really go anywhere. You have it's just a mess. Like, I just think it's a mess. And thematically, like I said, you know, it's not like they had an interesting theme, in my opinion, and just failed to execute it. Like, there are points of Fates where I'm like, wow, that was a really interesting theme. Or like Radiant Dawn, you know, like Path of Radiance, Radiant Dawn, where I'm like, wow, that's a really interesting theme. I wish, you know, like they tried, they didn't quite succeed, but like I wish they would have. Three Houses just kind of feels like they didn't know what they wanted the themes to be. There's themes you can pick out, but like I don't even know what I would want them to be further developing. Hey, it's me again in post. I feel like I need to kind of expand on the whole, like, I don't even know what themes I would want them to kind of flesh out more. Because like I said, there are themes in Fire Emblem Three Houses. It's just, I'm trying to think of things that you could flesh out without substantially changing the product that we got. For example, I feel like Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn already have a very strong theme of racism. I feel like there are places where it's not necessarily handled the best. I think there are ways that they could have, you know, used the theme a little bit more effectively, but I can see how they could expand on that theme without necessarily changing the substance of what Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn are. Similarly, Fates, there's a lot of themes in there, especially in the localization, that weren't necessarily executed in the most clear way. For example, the abuse that the Norian siblings face is kind of present, but not so much touched upon explicitly. I feel like you could expand on that in a way where you don't substantially have to change what happens in Fates. Three Houses is a little bit messier because of the uneven way the themes are spread through each of the 4 routes. Like I did with my example with the trauma, it can be very heavy in one, undermined in another, barely present at all. If you wanted to expand on the trauma theme, I would expect to see it be more prevalent with Silver Snow and Verdant Wind, for example, which would mean substantially changing Verdant Wind to be more focused on that aspect of Claude instead of kind of being like a copy-paste of Silver Snow, and then having Silver Snow have Rhea actually be more present within the story instead of just being someone you rescue and then immediately dies. I can't think of a way that I could expand on that theme without substantially changing parts of Three Houses. And I feel that's a thing with Three Houses, is that people kind of tend to focus a lot on its potential. You know, it potentially could have been this amazing story if it had just had 6 more months in the oven. I've seen a lot of people say that, where, you know, if it had just had however much more time in development, it would have been like even more amazing, or like perfect. I don't think it's really fair to judge the game on its potential like that when I'm judging all of the other games on their execution. It has to execute the theme in an even way across all of the stories. Additionally, and if they wanted to have different themes for the different routes, then that needed to be much clearer than it wound up being. Because so much of each route is kind of copy-pasting plot beats and storylines, you really can't develop 4 completely independent themes within that structure. You know, so if you wanted to have 4 separate themes, you would have to make substantial changes to the way each route plays. Like, you would have to have a Verdant Wind that was completely different from a Silver Snow, because it would need to be approaching things in a completely different way in the way it's telling its story and the way it's approaching its themes. This is kind of why Three Houses comes off as such a mess to me, because it's so interconnected that it can't, like, each route can't be kind of its own completely 100% independent story, but it's just disconnected enough that it can't take advantage of that interconnectedness and make a cohesive whole. But yeah, it's just like, it's not even like, oh, they had good themes and they didn't quite execute them. For me, it's like, they had themes. I don't even know if they necessarily did those themes intentionally, and they definitely didn't execute them. So for that reason, Three Houses honestly goes in like more negative than positive for me on the story aspect. And I will fight you on the side of the street. That's another thing about Three Houses. Three Houses has the weirdest cutscenes because it's so clear which cutscenes they were explicitly making for trailer shots and which ones they were not. Because half of them are like really like beautifully rendered 3D, like in-engine, I think, cutscenes. Like the Gronder rematch cutscene is very obviously done in that sort of style where they're fully 3D models, like rendered, all of that. And then like the other half is just like the same thing as Echoes, where it's like this like janky looking 15 frames per second 2D animation where half the time the characters don't even look like the characters as they look in the game. And it's just a very weird, like, lack of polish. I would say the main thing that defines Three Houses for me is just like the lack of polish on a lot of this stuff. Engage. Yeah, we don't stop with the controversial opinions with Engage. Again, I actually think Engage's story is not as bad as people say it is. I think it has a very clear, interesting theme of chosen family, specifically chosen family, and that's really well demonstrated by the way Alir interacts with everybody. Like, there's a very clear, like... Let me get into this. There's a very clear sort of, like, way that Alear and Vale are supposed to foil each other in the early game, where Alear is like the embodiment of kind of this like chosen family, following the people who love you, while Vale is very clearly sort of stuck in the mindset of blood relations, no matter how bad. And, you know, that's kind of manifested, it kind of culminates in Vale eventually choosing to forgo that blood relation and join Alear. And, you know, Vale and Alear are a blood family. Nobody says that your blood family can't also be your chosen family, but they very actively, obviously choose this theme of family for Engage. And I think it's actually executed really well. And that's like a big priority for me when I'm talking about ranking something story. Is not just like, do I like what happened? It's, did it have a clear theme? Did it have a clear plot line? Did it execute it well? In my opinion, Engage has a very clear theme, it has a very clear plot, and it executes it in a serviceable enough manner. You know, I'm not gonna say it's groundbreaking, but like, if you read it, or if you watch it, you play it, you know what it's saying. You can see how it gets to where it got. And so for me, like, that's gonna boost it a lot. Even if you say, like, oh, well, it's kind of Saturday morning cartoony, it's kind of goofy at points, like, there's definitely some parts that are not executed very well. Such as, you know, I've harped on Lumera's death scene, I've harped on the way sometimes the dialogue just can't let a scene, like, rest, you know? Like, it kind of has to over-explain things to you. But honestly, like, those moments are not, like, the majority of the story. Like, they're very easy moments to kind of pull out and cherry pick if you want to say Engage is, like, a really badly told story. But if you actually play the whole thing all together, it's fine. Those are some standout bad moments in a generally competently told story, in my opinion. I really like the cutscenes in Engage. I think they're very beautifully done. They're very, you know, dynamic, and they're very pretty. I can't justifiably put it any lower than like. I'd say it's probably like at the top of like for me. And now we're back into the spin-offs. Heroes is more negative than positive, if I'm being real. It's just like in my opinion, the heroes' stories kind of follow the same beat every single chapter, where it's like you're introduced to a new kingdom, you get the main girl from the kingdom, you find out the big bad is doing something big, bad, and evil, you find out you can't actually kill the big bad without the magical MacGuffin, so then you spend 8 chapters running away looking for the magical MacGuffin until you find it, and then you kill the boss, and then the story's just like over. You know, sometimes they even leave like plot threads hanging, like Fjorm was dying for like 6 years before she got like healed or whatever in her Tempest Trials extra. So yeah, it's not good. It's also like a mobile game. I'm not like expecting great things from it, but whatever. Warriors is just meh. I didn't really like it that much when I first played it, and then I played it again after playing Sacred Stones, and I was like, oh, the plot of Warriors is just Sacred Stones, but with the Lemon Twins. Okay. So it has it's like the same story as Sacred Stones. I don't know what else to say about it. Yeah, I hate to do this to you, Three Hopes, but you're mostly negative. It's just like, take all of the messiness from Houses, and then they didn't really fix any of the problems with Houses, they just added more problems on top. Like, they didn't fix the Agarthan storyline. They just added Shez on top as an extra component of the Agarthan storyline that also never gets explained fully and never has a resolution and is mostly ignored. throughout the entire game. So it's like, it's just compounding the problems from the original. And then, you know, cap it all off with 3 complete non-endings that don't resolve anything and aren't satisfying, some really significant writing problems in some places. Like, they didn't give Claude his own storyline, they just made him slightly different as an element of Edelgard and Dimitri's wider storylines. You know, they didn't add more Nabatean content, they just had Rhea go to the kingdom and do nothing for the entire game, just like she did in 3 Houses, except she wasn't kidnapped this time for some reason. You know, they didn't... Like, it didn't fix anything, they just added more problems on top of the problem. So, that's why it's in mostly negative. That's gonna do it for the story tier list. I guess I could probably do, like, one more quick one. Kind of compounding the 2 into, like, a general tier list. I don't know if I'm gonna, like, go into super huge detail because I just talked your ears off. This is 40 minutes right now. Other one was probably like over 30 minutes too. I just realized I'm gonna have to edit this and I hate editing. It's fine. I'll be back with the arranged tier list with my overalls. Okay, now I'm just gonna do like quick rapid fire, like overall, if I were to combine my opinions on the gameplay with my opinions on the story, where I would put all of these games. Echoes, I was very meh on the story, I was pretty negative on the gameplay. It goes in more negative than positive for me. Binding Blade is a solid like. I like the story, I like the gameplay. It's not my favorite, it's not my least favorite either. Sacred Stone's also solid and like, I like the gameplay, I like the story, also not like super exceptional. I like Binding Blade slightly more than it. Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn, I would say I love them. They're very good. I enjoy the story. The gameplay could use a little bit of work, but I also acknowledge that it's sort of like a product of its time for Fire Emblem. And I don't think the gameplay is egregious enough for me to bump it down into like, the story does sort of push it up into that next tier for me. Awakening, I genuinely really like. I think I would put it above Sacred Stone, maybe below Binding Blade. I will have to play it again to see if that shifts, but yeah, good story, good gameplay. It's not like my most exceptional game in my repertoire of Fire Emblem games, but it's, it's good. Birthright, Conquest, and Revelation, I love them, love everything about them, except all the things that I don't love about them. I would even probably put them above, not Binding Blade, Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn. I will also say part of this tier list is a little bit influenced by the way in which I sort of experienced these games for the first time. Like, I'm not like an entirely objective human being who is independent from the society around me or anything. If I had more fun with like a community, that does also factor into my opinion a little bit for like the overall. I had a ton of fun in the Fates community. I had a ton of fun writing fanfic for it, I had a ton of fun engaging with people, fan art, all of that. I didn't really have that much fun in the Echoes fandom. Like, the Echoes fandom didn't even really exist for me. I had a ton of fun streaming Binding Blade and Sacred Stones. That probably bumps me up a little bit. I played Awakening on my own. I didn't really engage with the fandom, so it's a little bit more neutral there. I played Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn with a friend. We had a lot of fun. That probably boosts it a little bit in my mind. 3 Houses, I'm pretty negative on the gameplay, I'm pretty negative on the story. I had a pretty bad experience in the fandom. God. It sounds ridiculous to say it out loud, but yeah, no, people threatening to kill me over my opinions on characters. So for that reason, it would probably be more meh if it weren't for, my opinions on the gameplay and all of the fandom experience, but it's honestly going in mostly negative for me. I'm sorry, 3 Houses. Engage, I would say I love it. Maybe not as much as Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn, but it was so much fun to play. It's one of those games where, like, I beat it for the first time and I immediately just wanted to go back and play it again. Heroes, meh. Warriors, I like it, honestly. Like, it's a good game. I'm actually, like, I've had notions of 100%ing it for a while now, and I've actually made like a lot of really good progress toward doing that. It's a game I will pick up on occasion, you know, in a month or a year, and it's like, it's good for a quick little jaunt if I just want to beat stuff up. Three Hopes, also mostly negative, sorry. Story's not great, gameplay's not my favorite for a Warriors title, and it's just like, you know, what even was it has the same problems as the Three Houses fandom, honestly. And I'm gonna abstain from genealogy for the moment. I don't know if I can fairly assess it without having a better idea of the story. So there we go, that is the sort of overall tier list where I would probably put these games if I were to integrate my feelings about the gameplay and my feelings about the story. And as I said earlier, I weight the gameplay a little bit more heavily than I weight the story, just because I value the playing part of playing a game, you know? So yeah, that's probably gonna do it for this 100 subscriber special. I hope you enjoyed my opinions, got enraged by my opinions, whatever floats your boat. If you hate what I think about these games, please be sure to comment below, and give a dislike to the video, because guess what, baby? It's all the same in the eyes of the YouTube algorithm. Keep boosting me up! And hopefully I'll see you guys next time. Peace.